5 wild lions were ready to attack until a 6-year-old girl stepped forward and whispered. The lions froze, then did the unthinkable. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The dust hadn't even settled from Vanko's lunge before the silence snapped taut like wire. The lion hadn't advanced far, only a few feet, a gesture of dominance rather than intent, but the effect on the assembled rangers was immediate and visceral. Fingers hovered tighter on triggers, breath caught in throats. Every pair of eyes locked on the lion's massive shoulders, coiled with muscle and heat. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting the sanctuary in long amber shadows that made the moment feel suspended in time, ancient and strangely sacred. Matt didn't blink. His boots were grounded, knees bent slightly, body squared not in defiance but in control. He knew lions, or at least he thought he did. But nothing in his 2 decades of field experience, from drought rescues in Utah to forest burns in Colorado, had prepared him for 5 emotionally scarred predators staring him down with the haunted eyes of things that had once been broken and never fully repaired. These weren't apex hunters. They were survivors of cages and beatings and hunger, beings whose rage simmered just beneath their silence. To his left, Ranger Devlin whispered through clenched teeth, "We're not going to hold this line if they push." Matt didn't respond. He was focused on Vanko. The lion's breath came heavy and low, his tail twitching with slow, deliberate arcs. His scars were visible even from this distance, across his snout, down one flank, over a half-missing ear. Matt had read the files. Vanko had been rescued from a basement pit fight ring in Ukraine. He'd been the reigning champion, not because he was the strongest, but because he learned fastest how to kill. Now, he was back in the wild, breathing free air. But it had never made him tame. The wild didn't heal trauma, it only gave it more space to echo. And just behind the glass of the visitor center, Matt could make out the blurred shape of Emma pressed against the window, her tiny face watching intently. His jaw tightened. He felt his insides twist, fatherly terror bleeding into professional calculation. The idea that this moment might be the last time he could protect her clawed at him more than any lion ever could. He raised his hand to signal, not to shoot, but to breathe. To wait. Because he knew one thing with complete certainty. The second they pulled a trigger, they'd lose control, not just of the lions, but of the fragile final balance that still held everything together. Inside the reinforced glass walls of the visitor center, the silence was as loud as a scream. The tension wrapped itself around the air like wire pulled too tight. Every breath a struggle, every movement weighted with fear. Children clung to parents, wide-eyed and pale. An elderly couple whispered prayers. A tour guide sat trembling with her back against a brochure rack, her hands wrapped around a walkie-talkie that remained useless. No one wanted to speak, as if sound itself might shatter the fragile barrier between survival and slaughter. And amidst it all stood Emma. She was still, unmoving, unblinking. Her small frame silhouetted against the giant pane of glass that separated the sanctuary from the now feral calm outside. Her forehead was gently pressed against the window, her hands splayed flat, and her eyes locked on Vanko with a depth far beyond her 6 years. No one else noticed. To them, she was just a child trying to make sense of chaos. But she wasn't trying, she was understanding. Vanko, the scarred lion, the violent one, didn't snarl. He didn't pace like the others. He stared at her, not through her, not past her, but into her. As though recognizing something ancient and unnamed, Emma tilted her head slightly, just a fraction, and the lion mirrored her. Then, without warning, he exhaled, a deep, chest-heaving sigh, and took a single step back. The moment passed without fanfare. No gasps, No reactions. No one saw. No one but Emma. She stepped away from the window, walked calmly toward her teacher, and tugged gently on her sleeve. "That lion is scared," she said with clarity, not suggestion, not speculation, truth. Her teacher blinked at her. "Sweetheart, we shouldn't talk now. Let's just stay quiet, okay?" Her voice trembled from the strain of pretending to be composed, but Emma had already turned. She looked again at the lions, still circling, still dangerous, but somehow not the same. Not to her. She walked toward the rear exit, where Ranger Doyle stood stiff and pale, hand on his holster. "I need to talk to my dad," Emma said. "I know what to do." The ranger stared down at her, confused, uneasy, caught between the rigidity of protocol and the quiet power of a child who didn't flinch. He didn't move, but he didn't speak either. Emma's voice cut through the room, not loud, but undeniable. "She says she needs to talk to you," he finally muttered into his radio. "She says she knows what to do." There was a pause on the other end. The silence that followed was heavier than any order he'd ever received. The air outside the visitor center was so heavy with anticipation it felt like gravity itself had thickened. Dust floated in slow spirals, disturbed only by the faint wind brushing across the ground. No one dared breathe. Not the rangers, locked in formation with weapons dangling uselessly by their sides. Not the crowd inside, who now pressed their faces against the glass in stunned silence. Time hadn't stopped, but it had, undeniably, changed. Matt stood paralyzed, his hand still hovering near Emma's shoulder, as if unsure whether to pull her back or let her keep walking into the mouth of the storm. But there was no storm now, only stillness. And in that stillness, a little girl's voice had become the axis upon which the world suddenly turned. The sound she made was nothing like speech. It was softer than a whisper, almost not a sound at all. A cadence more than a tone, rounded, slow. The kind of noise that doesn't belong to language but to instinct. It floated outward in fragile waves, trembling through the air like the final notes of a music box winding down. Vanko's ears flicked forward. His enormous body, coiled like a tripwire, visibly softened. His head dipped. A low rumble emerged from his chest. Not a growl, but something older, something maternal. Recognition. He sank to his haunches, blinking slowly at Emma like a tired sentinel watching the return of a long-lost scent. Then, almost in rhythm with breath itself, the others followed. One lion laid down, then another, and another. Within moments, 5 apex predators, beasts built for fear and fury, had lowered themselves into the dirt with the reverence of monks entering prayer. Matt had seen miracles in nature before, a blind eagle guiding its mate to a nest, a starving pack of wolves sparing a deer. But this wasn't that. This was something that bent the edges of reason. His mind screamed for logic, but his eyes refused to deny what they saw, his daughter, barefoot in the dust, speaking to lions in a voice the world had forgotten how to hear. Devlin whispered behind him, "Matt, is she—" "I don't know," Matt replied, never taking his eyes off her. His voice cracked, raw with awe. "But she's not like us." And neither, it seemed, were they. The lions hadn't been tamed. They hadn't submitted. They had remembered. Remembered something ancient, hidden beneath centuries of teeth and fire. Something only a child could still carry, and only the wild could still recognize. Satisfaction. The weakest among us was never weak. A day later, wildlife psychologists confirmed something no one had ever seen. Emma's voice. Its tone, rhythm, mimicked a specific vocal frequency used by lionesses with young cubs. A tone scientists still barely understood. Somehow, Emma had replicated it. She doesn't just hear them, one of the researchers said. She feels them. The media ran wild with headlines. The whispering girl who stopped the lions. But Matt didn't care about the fame. He sat beside Emma that evening, watching her talk to her stuffed lion, Milo, in their tiny cabin on the edge of the preserve. "I was wrong about you," he said. She smiled without looking up. "No, Daddy, you just didn't know how to listen." And in that moment, Matt realized softness wasn't weakness. In a world built on control and fear, it took unimaginable strength to speak softly to chaos and be heard.